I'm Mike, and welcome to Retro Boost. A little over a year and some change ago, I published a video on my 5X Pro settings for all my consoles, the whole idea of which was to show what I like and stuff that I've seen elsewhere and applied, and like Wobbling Pixels, for example, had a number of helpful videos on like N64 and PS2 settings, and I applied those, really liked them, showed off my other console settings as well, and like I wanted to be an information exchange. Let me show you what I like and what I've learned and what I've seen, and tell me what you like and what you learn and what you've seen. And since I published that, there's been like a number of RetroTink 5X Pro firmware updates. I've had some hardware changes in my setup, like some consoles are SCART now, some used to be composite, now they're component, like the Dreamcast. Some used to use just straight SCART, and currently they run SCART and convert to components. So stuff is like different. That's kind of always in flux until I figure out exactly what I want to do with it as I kind of continue to tinker with things. But you know, so hardware is different, we got new RetroTink firmware to play with, so thought it was about time for an update, especially considering that the current firmware of the 5X Pro seems like it's going to be the last. It's been a long time since it got updated again. 3.0 is the current. That came out like, gosh, probably 8 months ago, something like that. Like, it's been a while. I think it was in the holidays. And the main thing that was new in the firmware that I didn't show when I made the first part of this was the HDR stuff, which is super cool. So we got HDR integration for a couple of these profiles. So I wanted to kind of go over where my settings are now currently, and then same kind of call to action. Like, tell me what you like, what do you use, because the whole kind of point of this is to provide like a jumping off point, much like the Wobbling Pixels videos did for N64, PS2, and then in this video I'll talk about it, the Wii, gave me like some good information to apply and run with. I'll hope the same thing happens for some of the stuff I show here for you, because maybe you'll see something that you didn't normally try and you're like, oh, maybe I'll give that a shot and see how it goes and make my own spin off of it, and here's how it went. So I hope that it can be helpful. I really do want it to be like a two-way street, like I said in the first part, same thing. So let's start getting into it. What I'll be doing is we'll go through my consoles. Hope, fingers crossed, the NES works, because it's starting to really die. I did get footage of it. If it doesn't work today, I have footage to talk about, but oh god, everything else is fine. So I'll go through the consoles one by one, NES maybe, and then show like 1080p fill, a generic 4x3 sharp. That's just like the baseline settings, just like show that, because that's good enough for like a lot of situations, like debatably all situations. The 5X Pro, turn it on and it looks awesome. For a lot of people, it's enough. So I want to show that, and then flip over to the profile in question. You'll see that kind of difference. I'll go over the settings of that profile and like why I like them, why I chose them, and depending on the console, provide some additional information that is relevant. There's the Console Mods Wiki for the 5X Pro has come such a long way. It is a treasure trove of details, some of which I'll be sharing here as well. So that's how we'll do this. If you find the video helpful or informative, please also consider subscribing, help grow the channel. We're beyond like 830 subs now, which is incredible. I think it's like 825 right now. Super grateful to everyone who watches and everyone who's subscribed, and feel free to join the Discord. It's where all the announcements, news, and just fun times are. We talk about games and movies and joke around and all kinds of fun stuff. So now let's jump into it. We'll start with the NES. NES. So my NES did decide to work today, so we can see it live. This is obviously the wrong input. The default profile is on component. Let's go ahead and swap it over to composite to see the true kind of default experience here. So this is 1080p fill, 4x3 sharp, composite NES. This is what you see when you just boot up the 5X Pro. Now let's flip it to my customized profile. Bam. It's gonna cut out multiple times, just a heads up. So you're gonna see it cut out now. It's probably gonna cut it again at some point. So now this is my customized profile. This would be 1080p over, still generic 4:3, soft instead of sharp, with HDR and scan lines. Sorry, it's not 4:3, it's the SNES sampling mode. I quite like that more than generic 4:3 for the NES. Discovered that very recently. Like, I have not been using that for very long, but I do like it quite a bit. See, there it is. I told you, we'll cut it one more time. It'll come back. It's the HDR flipping around. So let's look at it in a little more detail. So output res, 1080p over. Out of all the three 1080p's, 1080p over is like the middle point for quality. It's the 5X and 5X Pro. It's also the most screen filling, sometimes at the consequence of potentially cutting off some of the game area, but you could always try to fix that with like scaling and cropping that the 5X Pro can do. 1080p under is like the sharpest, but it is like the smallest on screen, so like the give and take there would be better quality with less screen space being used, and depending on your television you may not like that, but 1080p over is what I'm using here. Scaled and cropped, had to do some adjustments here. I did go ahead and like dial it in, so this is like a perfect 4:3 aspect ratio here, achieved by increasing the vertical size to reach that. Then we got soft. I think the soft with scan lines can look quite good for the NES in particular. I saw some sources utilizing that, talking about that, and I tried it and I like it too. I left everything else kind of alone. I have experimented with the deinterlacer and the Bob scanline field being different, and either I can't really tell the difference or I think it's worse off. Like, I don't know. This is kind of the stuff that I'd be curious to get more information on what other people like to use, because I'd be curious if there's like a better or clearer way to get the motion processed and whatnot than the defaults here. And then I said I was using the SNES sampling mode. I quite like this. The alternative would be like generic 4:3. I like the SNES, not 16:9. I'll go into the game to show that again. And then for post-processing, we've got scan lines turned on. This is the BVM preset. With the scan line strength increased a little bit, the gamma boost brought way down. The default's like 17 for this profile, and I found, I'll press start to get into the game, I found that I thought that was just way too bright. So this is with it reduced down to 5, and then I upped the color boost to kind of compensate for the brightness that I took away. So yeah, the default was just too much. Normally I would use like 10, but even this I feel like it looks kind of like overexposed. So I brought it down to like 5 or even 6, up the color. And then if you, I don't think it looks as good with SNES sampling, but to show off an alternative, if you were to go in and change it to 4:3 and you go into the SDTV decoder, you can set this guy to notch, and that makes the image like even softer. And I think that for someone that likes doing CRT stuff, you'd like that quite a bit. This is supposed to be like the CRT way, and the notch filter there is recommended for consoles like the NES. So just another tip there, picked up from, I want to say the Console Mods Wikis where I saw that one. I don't like that as much though for this Super Nintendo sampling mode. I think 4L adaptive is better for that specifically, personally, and I can show you and you can be the judge. But and there, don't like that as much. Okay, there it goes. It's very similar. So like there's notch. Let it process for a second. Or not. Maybe it is better. Okay. What was I seeing earlier? I was playing around with this before and it... Oh no, I guess it is still softer. Okay, I'm just an idiot. What do I know? Oh, because I'm going through fixed and adaptive. I'm gonna... Oh man, I am the dumbest. Okay. Okay, yes. I'm not crazy. I don't like it as much. That's notch. And that's adaptive, which is like the default. I think adaptive is better. And then lastly would be the type of VSync. I tried out Genlock for the NES. Genlock is one of the newer types. FrameLock is what I've kind of always been using. It's the least latency, least amount of latency with FrameLock. Genlock is very similar, and it's supposed to be more accurate, and from what I'm able to find out doing some digging, it's best for like composite, or if you're doing like 1440p output, which I can't do, and I'll explain that when I get to the consoles that I used to do it with, the N64 and the PS2. It doesn't work anymore, but I tried it out. I don't really like notice a difference between Genlock and FrameLock. They both seem to have great low latency, and they work. I don't have any problems with the console like cutting in and out or whatever, things going like horribly wrong. So Genlock, I've tried it here. Everything else I'm doing though is FrameLock still. FrameLock gives you like 0.025 frames of lag, something like that. It's very low latency. But that is the NES experience that I like in a nutshell. I'd be curious to know what you've tried, you know, like scanline profiles or settings or horizontal sampling. Share it all. Give it to me so I can try it. This is like one of those games that is like, with HDR, might be too bright. Maybe even 5 and 6 is still not enough. I don't know. It's very, very bright. That was an empty battle encounter. Like, this screen is kind of like, oh god. So some games you may have to go in and fine tune. It's very rare that settings with the HDR stuff are like set and forget. Just to throw that out there, especially with the N64. But we'll get into that. So that's the NES experience. Moving on to the next console. Moving on to Super Nintendo. So when I made the first video, I was using HD Retrovision component cables for the Super Nintendo. Currently, and probably going forward to free up more inputs on the Extron switch, I'm using SCART. It's the Retro Gaming Cable's universal Nintendo SCART cable, running into the 5X Pro, SCART input directly, nothing else in between. And this would be... this would be the default experience for that cable and the 5X Pro. So again, 1080p fill, 4x3 sharp with the Super Nintendo running RGB SCART. And this is the game UN Squadron. So let's go ahead and get into the game, and I'll pause it, and that'll be a good place to start. Okay, now we're paused in the game. So this again is the default profile, just flipped over to the SCART input. So 1080p fill, 4x3 sharp, perfectly fine image. I have no complaints here, really. So let's load into my profile. Bam. Let it catch up. Bam. Alright, so it's pretty much the same thing, just bigger. And why is that? It's 1080p over versus 1080p fill. And then nothing else is really different. With this, it's pretty simple for me. Like, this isn't one that I really have done a lot of engineering with, like I have with the NES by direct comparison. So 1080p over is my preferred here. No scaling and cropping for this particular horizontal sampling mode, although we'll show something in a second. Sharp, motion adaptive, nothing else different there. Generic 4x3. I tend to prefer generic 4x3 over the Super Nintendo sampling mode, mainly because I feel like generic 4x3 is just a little bit cleaner looking. So this is now the SNES mode, and like parts of it I think are better, but parts of it are worse too. Like, I don't really like how the helicopter is a little more of a pixel mess now than it was before. So like, that's why I kind of like generic 4x3 personally. But again, there's no like wrong answers here, and I wonder if maybe scanlines would help kind of compensate for that. Hard to say. Sorry if I yawn a lot. It's been a long day, and I have a headache, and I'm tired, and I'm we're doing this though. So overall, generic 4x3 is my preferred. I just like it, and I've compared the two before and like kind of talked about like one versus the other. I think I did that in the original video of this thing. I think they're all, you know, it's very preferential. For me though, generic is my preferred. Nothing in post-processing. I don't really like scan lines or feel the need for scan lines really with the Super Nintendo. I have tried it before though. With Aperture Grill was my preferred, and then bump up the strength, flip on HDR. Let's do that. It is frame lock for the VSync, least amount of latency. We'll flip over to HDR 10. That's probably too bright, so we'll bring that down. 10's probably going to be good. 9 or 10. We'll do 8. That's pretty good. I like that. Would I want a game like this every time? No. I feel like for the NES, it really helps with the overall experience. For the Super Nintendo, using like an RGB cable or HD Retrovision's component cables, I feel like it looks like excellent, and I don't really feel the need to add more to it. That's kind of why. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that all back down, although compared to before, we definitely lost a lot of color, right? So yeah, kind of simple in comparison to the SNES, but this is what I prefer. This game is so hard, I can't even describe how hard this thing is. It's very hard. It's a hard game. Wireless SNES controller, by the way. Retrobit Legacy 16, great little controller. Been using it for a long time, never really talked about it. Here's a chance. This is a cool controller. It's got little like Nintendo Switch style analog sticks. So hey, there's the SNES experience. Pretty simple for me, so this one I'd be pretty curious to hear what you guys like to use, again, because I'm just pretty vanilla with this personally. Flipping on HDR if I want to, don't really feel the need to. Let me know what you guys do, because for me it's pretty simple here. Sega Genesis. A console that I just don't really play all that much, and because of that, my settings haven't really changed at all. I can throw out some interesting trivia though for some output modes, a recommended sampling mode for certain resolutions. My brain is just mush right now. So this is the default profile. 1080p fill, 4x3, sharp, the usual. We can see there's a lot of overscan. Much like with the NES, the Genesis has a lot of overscan by default. So the first perk to a custom profile is being able to crop all that out of the way. Let me go ahead and load my profile, which is going to be 1080p over versus fill, and the Genesis 320 sampling mode. Come on. There we go. So much more screen filling, and we've also got rid of all that overscan. This is a situation where the 1080p over can definitely lead to situations where screen elements are being cut off, because this is not like dialed in 4x3. It's not even close. It's like 1.09. So it wants it to be like even bigger. No. So that's a problem, because then the Sonic live counter goes off the screen. So it's one of those situations. The other thing worth mentioning is this is the 320 output mode. Some Genesis games run at 224 output resolution, and when that happens, the optimal sampling mode is actually the Super Nintendo one. I am not sure what Sonic outputs as. I'm assuming it's 320, because I feel like it looks a lot better as 320. And apparently, like, the multiplayer mode of Sonic 2 here is like 480i. So much like the PS1, which we're going to get into, there's a lot of like alternate resolutions here that may necessitate a number of profiles if you really care about squeezing all the performance out of it and having it all set up optimally. So that's crazy to me that the output of the multiplayer is like 1080 or 480i. But this is where I like the single player, at least, of Sonic 2 to be. And other games that I've played with Genesis have been this profile. So just 1080p over 4x3 and still sharp. Sega Genesis sampling mode. I think it looks quite crisp and clean, and like I mentioned, this controller is very cool. I love the idea of old consoles getting controllers that have analog sticks. I was using one for the NES actually. The Retro Fighters Jab is what I use for the NES, and that one too has an analog stick. So they're really cool controllers. Like just gotta say, it's a good time. Blue Retro is another one that I've come across. You can use modern controllers like Xbox One and PS5 and stuff like that for these consoles. Getting off topic, but just cool stuff to be aware of out there. I'm curious, anyone who has played around and has messed around with the getting it set up for those games that output like 224p and stuff like that. I'd be curious to hear your Genesis stories, to hear what Sega do that Nintendo doesn't do. Alright, so there's the Genesis experience. Moving on to the next one. PlayStation 1. So the PS1 has a lot of output resolutions. There's like 3 or 4 total, something like that. So there is a list online if you really care about like matching the sampling mode to the PlayStation's output resolution. There's a pretty handy list of like every PlayStation 1 game and like the modes that it outputs as. If you match it, you get like it's better. Like, you can kind of tell when you've matched it. So this is the standard default profile here, 4x3, which is fine for most situations with the PS1. It's kind of what I was using for the most part until I finally found that list, and I was like, yeah, here we go. So instead of just loading the profile, we'll kind of do this in baby steps. So first, let's do 1080p over, because I like the more screen filling kind of experience. Looks like it does require a little bit of scaling and cropping, but we'll save that for a minute. This game, Spyro 2, is one of the 512 games, so to best match the sampling mode of what the game wants to run as, I can change it to high-res 512, and that looks like pretty awesome. Like I like that quite a bit. And you can kind of tell that like 512 is the one to go with, because like 384 is alright. It's also perfectly usable, but the 512 just seems to be like, yeah, like everything looks right, like proportionally, and the clarity of it, like you can kind of tell when you've matched it. So find the list and kind of go with that, or just leave it in 4x3 and call it a day, you know, whatever you want to do. As far as like going all the way with the profile, I'll go ahead and choose it. Let that load up. Okay, there we go. So this will be 1080p over, a little bit of scaling and cropping. This is dialed in 4x3, achieved by increasing the vertical size. Sharp is pretty great for PS1. It's a very sharp console, so I think it plays well into the flavor of the picture. I have tried smooth. Smooth for some games is pretty great, but generally speaking, smooth is kind of built for 480p sources and higher, but again, it's preferential. 512, and then that's kind of it. I don't really do anything else with the PS1. I've tried the HDR scanline thing in my HDR video, but it isn't something that I would want to use every day. And then I did choose frame lock as the choice, the lowest possible input lag. Overall, matching it here, like playing this in 512, like this looks pretty awesome. I think the PS1 really shines. As far as the type of input this is a SCART cable from Retro Gaming Cables. Currently, it runs into a RGB to comp from RetroTink to convert it to component. That runs using HD Retrovision component cables into the Extron switch. might be saying, why? Well, it's to get the most out of my Extron switches and have everything kind of run through that. I did order a SCART switch, and this is one of the consoles that, once that arrives, we'll be going through the SCART switch going forward to now free up some additional inputs. So what you're seeing here is like a SCART cable being converted a component before the 5X Pro gets its hands on it, and it looks quite awesome. The RGB to comp is also like a zero latency device, so like it doesn't add any input lag to the equation, so it accomplishes that task and doesn't interfere. The best of both worlds. And controller of choice, just to throw that out there, the Retro Fighters Defender, great controller. Really enjoy it. You're seeing the capture cut out. It always does that when I change sources a lot. It'll cut like twice and then it stays stable. It's not a problem with the 5X Pro or stuff like that. It's happening on every source when I mess with the output resolutions a ton. Especially doing it like this all in one session. I'm definitely abusing my capture card here. It does not like what we're doing. So there's all the PS1 settings I prefer. Again, the sampling mode would kind of depend on the input resolution of the game to determine that, or just put it on 4:3 and call it a day, whatever you prefer. N64. So this is my modded N64. Now here's what's changed since the last video I did. No longer using the 1440 output mode, mainly because I just can't. It just stopped working. At least not working as in the 5X Pro, working as in like compatibility with my stuff. It was never compatible with my TV. The only way that I could play it was via Capture Preview, because my capture card does accept it, but for whatever reason, just not anymore. Doesn't want to do it. The picture drops. I have to keep playing with it, but I've kind of lost that ability, so I've been doing 1080p stuff in lieu of that. This N64 has an RGB mod. D-Blur is currently not enabled, so this is like RGB with like no additional enhancements, what you're seeing here. If I were to turn on D-Blur, that should be D-Blur on. It can be pretty subtle, but I can see it changing. And that's, there we go. So that's D-Blur on versus D-Blur off. Look at the text around like the S in select and the E, currently off, on. So that's what D-Blur does. As far as an optimized profile, this is one of the consoles that I utilize HDR with now, because I think it helps. Certain games like look quite good on their own. Mario Kart 64 here is like one of the better looking ones. The default profile with D-Blur enabled, that's pretty alright. Like, that's good. I don't really have much of any significant complaints to list about it. The N64 is just like a really tough console to improve, so it's all just like degrees. I will say that overall the Rad 2X is my current favorite way to play N64. If I'm doing it with the 5X Pro now, it's with scanlines and HDR. So let's go ahead and turn that on. Boom. And here is my N64 profile. The picture's probably going to cut out one more time at some point here. Brace yourself for that. So this would be 1080p over, HDR and scanlines. And I think that's pretty awesome. The brightness is an issue with certain games. You're going to have to play with it game by game. Like some games are just like nuclear bomb levels of bright. And require adjustment, but let's go down the line here. So 1080p over, nothing really going on with the scaling and cropping. Some games though, like they're all different. Like some are going to require it, some won't. It's weird. Interlacing kept it to sharp. I think sharp is good with N64, at least outside of like the dedicated sampling mode for it, because this is not the N64 sampling mode. This is generic 4:3. I think the N64 sampling mode kind of makes it too digitized looking. We can go ahead and toggle over to that though. Should be about there. Let's see. Oh, one more. Maybe two more. I might have skipped it. There we go. Actually with scanlines, that's alright. without scanlines, I'm definitely not a fan of it. I actually haven't tried it with scanlines before. Seeing it here, that's okay. Learning things today. So not terrible. Let me go back to 4x3. Let's get it back there. High res 512. This isn't bad either. When I toggle it over to the N64 input, the PS1 profile was still turned on. This isn't bad. 512 is like not the worst. That's interesting. This should be 4x3. Let's see. Yes. So 4x3. This is what I like. And then for post-processing, this is the aperture grill preset. Not much done with the strength. I think the 5 is the default, but the gamma is way down. This default's above 10. I think the 10's just a little like the NES. Like some of these settings can be too bright, a little overexposed. Bring it down just a little bit. Color boost if you want to kind of compensate for that. All preferential there. That's what I like, and that's HDR 10, and I believe frame lock as well. Yep, HDR 10, frame lock. That's the N64 experience there. So I'm using 1080p fill. If your screen can support it, the 1440p output with the N64 is also quite good. Like, I liked it quite a bit. For whatever reason, my capture card just doesn't like to take it anymore, and my TV's not compatible anyway, so it's kind of a lose-lose. Because even gaming it on here, it's going to be 1440, like, compressed to 1080p. There's still added detail, I guess, being like shrunken, so there was like a gain in the experience. Like, I know there was. It looked better, but you know, I can't really experience it as 1440 anyway, so for me it's not a total loss. The 1080p inputs are quite good as they are. Overall though, outside of using scanlines and HDR, definitely more of a fan of the Rad 2X nowadays for the N64. But that's the N64 experience there, so moving on to the next one. The GameCube. This one, I don't really use the 5X Pro a whole lot for on the GameCube. When I got the Retrobit Prism cables, I was like really into it and was using it a lot. There's a lot of like Retro Boost arcade GameCube videos, like the Mario Sports games, for example, and the huge majority of the Luigi's Mansion playthrough that we did that were done like with the 5X Pro and those component cables. But largely, I'm all about the Carby nowadays. I just like it a little bit better. I like its flavor and the way that the picture works. With that said, the GameCube experience out of the 5X Pro is still amazing. It's very good. So let's kind of go over what settings I prefer. It's pretty straightforward. This is the default profile here using component cables, and the game is outputting 480p, the progressive scan, as the game labels it as it boots up. And that is like so important to get like the best performance out of the GameCube. It is really amazing, and the bulk of the GameCube's library seems to support it. Out of all the games I have, only like a handful don't support 480p output. But this is the default here, which again is like really good enough for most people. It's very good. We'll flip it over to my GameCube profile, which isn't going to be anything too fancy. Mainly it's going to be a little more screen filling. It's 1080p over versus 1080p fill. Generic 4x3, which is the same as the default, and that's kind of it. Frame lock is turned on like it is for like practically all these profiles, except for a couple. The Genesis and the NES one, I think, are the only ones I use Gen Lock on. Everything else is frame lock, and that's it. I've played around with scanlines and HDR for this, as covered in the HDR video I did for the 5X Pro. Didn't really like it too much. Don't really think it's my jam for the GameCube. The only alternative thing I'll say here, beyond just the resolution, would be, since this is now a 480p source, we could use the DTV horizontal sampling modes, which appear for certain situations where you have 480p for a source. I don't think it's compatible with 1080p over, though. I think my only options are going to be 16:9 and 4:3. Let's see, probably yes. Yeah, see that? I'm only two options there. But if I flip it back to 1080p fill, let it catch up. There we go. Confirm selection. Yes. We'll go into sampling. Now we have the DTVs. So we can do generic or the DTV ones, which look very similar, but you may, depending on your display, you may notice the difference, and one may be better than the other, and maybe you like it more. But those are alternate options. There's DTV A and B, and then if I just have to kind of recenter the image, oh, wrong direction, let's go back, too high. Let's get it a little centered. That looks pretty good right there. There we go. So there's like DTV-A 1080p fill for the GameCube. It's a 480p source. Think the jury's really out there what you would prefer with the different options. Like I said, for the GameCube, I really prefer the Insurrection Industries Carby. It's a plug-and-play HDMI adapter for the GameCube. Very good price, too, if you're a GameCube enthusiast. There's also other devices out there that use the same firmware. It's the GameCube Video DVI Retrobit Prism adapter, same price as the Carby. It's like the same thing, really. And then there's even more functional ones that are out there, too, that have, like, additional outputs, optical audio, all kinds of crazy stuff. That's also really cool stuff to be aware of. So for the 5X Pro, pretty straightforward for the GameCube, but I do kind of prefer the Carby nowadays. I'll probably end up replacing this GameCube profile with like an alternate Super Nintendo one that maybe has like the pre-emphasis filter set to -5 for those games that have like transparency effects you want to maintain or something like that. I'll find a use for it. Cool. Moving on. The PS2. This is another console that I used to do 1440p for, 2560 by 1440 specifically, and just kind of can't do anymore because my capture card just doesn't like it. It's a bummer. It looks quite good. So now I'm running some 1080p based profile here, like with the N64. This is also using component cabling. Forgot to mention it, but the N64 was a SCAR cable running into another RGB2 comp. This is component right here, HT Retrovision's PS2 component cables. So this is the default profile for Metal Gear Solid 2. It's fine. Like, this is good. Most of the PS2 games, I'm actually kind of happy with the default, and usually don't mess with it much further. To mess around with optimizing it, though, here's where I landed. Brace yourself. It's going to be different. Boom. Okay. Got a little bit smaller, it would seem. Not by much, but it is. So what's going on here? Well, this is 1080p over. Okay. It is also like dialed in, which involved shrinking it quite a bit to get to a perfect 4:3. And then smooth. I like smooth, just personally. It's whatever you want really here. Then horizontal sampling. We enable interlacing. If you don't enable interlacing, it like doesn't let the horizontal sampling like work correctly, apparently. And then this is set to high-res 858, which is what's recommended for like 480i sources, which is a lot of what the PS2 outputs. Not every game is necessarily going to look like shrunken like this. It's just, it might be, I know it, they don't, because for the HDR video, I got footage of Dragon Quest VIII, and it's not like this. So it just depends on the game. It's just Metal Gear Solid in particular seems to run like this. Don't let that scare you off from the 858 experience. I've also messed around with it with games like Jak and Daxter and things like that, and it wasn't quite as tiny as this. You still don't remember it being tiny. Maybe it was, and I'm just crazy. It doesn't bother me personally. And then frame lock like before, and that's it. This is a console that I've also played around with the HDR stuff with. It was pretty good, but it's not one that I feel like it really needs it. I think that this profile here is quite good, at least with this game. The PS2 is kind of like the N64. Like, some of the games may look better than others with your particular profile. But for this, given that it's a predominantly 480i source and, you know, taking the time to kind of study and understand what all these different sampling modes are for, I definitely like the 858. For this. I think it looks good for Metal Gear here in particular. Again, some games are going to look better than others. But 1080p over high res 858 is a pretty solid start for the PS2. Dreamcast. So I don't even think I talked about the Dreamcast in my original 5X Pro profiles video, mainly because it wasn't like hooked up yet, not legitimately at least. Like I was waiting to get my hands on those component cables, which now I have. So this is the Dreamcast using the Retro Gaming Cables 480, the Retro Gaming Cables component cables outputting 480p. You can toggle between 480p and 576i on the output. So this is the 480p output. We can see that even the default profile needs to be kind of played with. It's offset too high. Let's go ahead and load my Dreamcast profile, and kind of like the GameCube, it's going to be very similar of an experience to the GameCube as far as what I like and what the other option is. Since it is a 480p output situation. So here we are. This is 1080p over, smooth with just generic 4x3. Screen filling, still very clear. Love what these component cables do for this console. It was definitely worth the wait. As an alternative, you could do 1080p fill, which I think still looks great. Bam, 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 bam. Okay. My scaling and cropping kind of like seems to carry over between changes. So that's how I adjusted it and cropped it a little bit. Smooth, like smooth. Generic 4x3. You could change it to the DTV inputs since this is a 480p source and we're using 1080p fill. Let's see if it gives it to us. Sometimes it doesn't. There it is. As far as A and B, just whatever you think looks better. But there's the DTV one. If you think it looks better, then go with it. For me, it's kind of hard to see the difference. Maybe I'll pick it up when I watch the capture footage back. But right now in front of me, it looks exceedingly similar. So I think it's all just kind of preferential there. But DTV, 2 clicks, should be back to 4x3. Since I'm not seeing it in real time, it's kind of harder. Yeah. DTV might be better. Hard to say. I have to watch that in post and kind of weigh in. But those are the options there since it is a 480p source. No HDR, no scan lines here. I prefer what we're seeing right here. I think it's a crisp, clean experience. I just wish I had more games to play other than Sonic Adventure and Crazy Taxi and this motocross game that I have. Regular Dreamcast controller, probably one of the worst controllers I've ever experienced in my life. Sorry to people who love the Dreamcast, but this thing is atrocious. I held off on buying a Retro Fighters one because I knew that they would eventually release a wireless one. Sure enough, they announced a wireless one recently, so I might end up trying that out. We'll see. Or maybe even get see if I can get some Blue Retro stuff for this console. The main problem is how short the cable is. I can't play this over on the couch. I'd have to get like 2 different extension cables for this thing. Another reason why I didn't buy the Retro Fighters one, because it still wouldn't have been long enough. So, alright, there's the Dreamcast experience. I believe that's everything. Yeah, so we're up to the last one. Although I'll do a bonus round here. We didn't talk about the original Xbox. I don't have a profile for it, but let's go ahead and talk about it real quick. Xbox. So Xbox is interesting because there are a lot of different possible output resolutions. I told my system settings that I can my TV is compatible with 480p and 720p. Tony Hawk's Underground here is like one of the 720p games, so it gives it to us by default in like this 16:9 presentation, and it doesn't matter if I choose like the other modes. Like if I choose 4x, like nothing changes. So I think that's just what happens with 720p input. 480p input. We can look at that in a second. I'll find a 480p game and toss in. But as far as like optimizing this goes, I mean, all I could really want to do is like crop out the edges to kind of like make it look even all around. That'd be kind of about it. I don't really feel the need to do anything else. We can make it smooth. That's probably the other thing I could do. Smooth is probably a little better. But that's really it. I would never really think about doing scan lines for the Xbox personally, but obviously you could pop in HDR and see what that looks like, which, now that I think about it, I haven't tried that yet, so let's inject HDR and see what this looks like. Whoa, it's a little nuclear. Okay. Maybe we can get it. Let's see if we can dial it in and make it look pretty. Yeah, dealer's choice there, if you think that looks better. I think 4 or 5 was about where it needs to go, but that might not be too great. The default's probably better. Not everything looks better with HDR flagging turned on. It's probably for the best. Worthwhile experiment. Let's switch over to a 480p game and see what that looks like real quick, though. Alright, so Star Wars Battlefront 2 here is one of the 480p compatible games. So this is the default profile 1080p fill in what should be generic 4x3. Let's double check that it kept that. Yes, and if you wanted to, you could make it 16:9, although it looks a little too stretched. Because you'd want the console settings to match. And then since it is a 480p source, you could choose between generic 4x3 or the DTV resolutions to see whatever you think you might like more. Again, they seem really similar to me, but if you can spot a difference, it looks ever so slightly that DTV might be better. Really hard to say. And then currently sharp, let's do smooth. So okay, and then we'd have to lower it a little bit. Let's get the vertical down. There we go. Alright, so there's kind of a thrown together Xbox profile. Not terrible. Let's let the game kind of run. Come on. Okay, now we're back. I was explaining the settings of the 5X Pro, and that's all the time it took for the battle to be over. So here we go, 1080p fill, DTV-A, with a 480p source on the original Xbox. Did pretty good. I got nothing really to complain about there. Overall, happy with it. Curious what everyone else is doing with the Xbox, given the variety of resolutions the thing outputs. Might be a multi-profile situation if you really like the Xbox. So now, that was kind of a bonus round. I'm not going to go over my PS3 settings. Truthfully, I should get rid of that profile and replace it with this one. I should just use HDMI for PS3. It was just kind of fun to mess around with it over a component. Truthfully, it doesn't look bad, but given that I can use HDMI, it would help my setup if I just use HDMI going forward, so I'm not going to go over the PS3. It'd be kind of similar to the 720p output of the Xbox. It would just be like a 16:9 kind of screen-filling 1080p experience. If you're really curious, though, I can throw up some gameplay here of Infamous. I did play through the entirety of Infamous on PS3 using the 5X Pro. So there you go. Take a look at it. See what you think. That is what you would get from the PS3 if you were to use the 5X Pro. I'll let that run for like another maybe 10 seconds or so, and then we'll move on to the final console of the day. Now we come to the Nintendo Wii. This one, I've made a lot of changes with my setup, although it's not the cabling or really the profile, it's the method of playing the games. So we go into our friend USB loader here. The big thing about the Wii is it came out that the Wii was not outputting like 480p the way that it's supposed to. So like the picture quality like never has been what it should have been. And USB loader, which you can get through Homebrew on the Wii, has the ability to apply a 480p patch that basically gives you the picture quality that you're supposed to get from these games. A recent video published by Wobbling Pixels also goes into further detail on what like settings to kind of click on in addition to that patch, and that was really the key to give me a great jumping off point to like understand this stuff, because I've had this for a long time and never really talked about it because I never thought that it looked better. But then after seeing some of those new videos and doing some more research, it was like, oh, okay, so I just didn't have the right combination of things kind of initially set up. So if you want to get all the details, I would suggest watching the video on USB Loader that Wobbling Pixels published. I'll put it in the description too. It's very informative. But the two main takeaways are, here's like your initial settings you want to enable in the loader settings. And then the second part of this are cheats, which again, I never would have thought of this. But the example used in Wobbling Pixels video, because it has the right kind of cheats, would be like Mario Kart. So if we go into the settings for the game and then go into Ocarina, which is the cheat stuff, some games, not all, but some games are going to have cheats that actually help with the game performance, like disabling blur or like additional effects that were all there to kind of mask the quality of the game's graphics, and since we're applying the 480p patch, we can kind of like get rid of that. So like in Mario Kart, the example was like stuff like this, like the no sun filter, no sun glare, things like that to kind of help the graphics. You can enable for certain games and add even more to what the 480p patch and those additional settings are doing for the game. So with all that understood, let me boot up. I'll do Metroid Prime 3, and we'll kind of take a look at the default profile and my custom profile for this. Okay, so here comes Metroid Prime 3 via the USB loader with those patches and like hacks applied to it. And this is just the default profile here. And I mean, you can see that there's like this kind of added clarity to it. It's looking pretty good already. I'm gonna go ahead and enable my custom profile, and we'll go over the settings that contains. There's our Wii profile. Let it catch up. Boom. Alright, so this would be 1080p fill, still keeping it 1080p fill. You could do over for the Wii. I've gone really back and forth a lot on this, and I think I like fill more, but I changed my mind on this like weekly, so who knows. Scaling, did have to bring the image down by default. USB loader kind of seats things high, I've noticed that. Although you definitely have to get into the game to make your profile, because like the USB loader like actual interface seats differently on screen than the games do. I once calibrated it like for that, and then I loaded in the game and the game was like offset too much. Just a tip. And then smooth, because I like smooth for 480p content, generally speaking. And then this is the DTV input. So here we are. Talked about this in the GameCube one, brought it up again in the Dreamcast one. This is the one that I think I like it more in. Again, still kind of playing around with it. If not DTV, I'd be doing generic 4x3. I've also played around with 1080p over. Again, like, there's no wrong answers here. Bottom line is, for profiles and the Wii, this is pretty fluid for me. I'm changing my mind constantly, haven't like nailed one thing down, but the major thing that really helps is using USB loader as the medium to launching the games, whether it be disk or by creating a backup of the game through USB loader. Either way, these patches and cheats can be applied, and that just takes it so far. It's so good. And then much like the other ones, frame lock, it's what I prefer. And then that's kind of it. The Wii is actually not a console that I've played around with like HDR or scan lines yet. I don't know about that. Maybe I'll try it one day, do like an updated HDR video with the consoles I didn't cover. Who knows? Let's go ahead and I'm gonna I picked this game because I was messing around with a lot of games when I first tested the USB loader stuff, and this is one that I really enjoyed seeing. I think this little like the cutscene of when the ship like goes to the planet is like really good looking. So let's go ahead and just kind of take in how this all looks by enjoying this little sequence here, because I think that this looks very clean. The USB loader has removed what I always referred to as the Wii fuzz. The Wii has always been a fuzzy console, even with component, even with 480p, and the USB loader, like the 480p patch and those additional settings, has cleared it away. There was like a transparent plastic layer over the screen that has been removed with these enhancements, and it's very cool. I really dig what this is doing for it, because I've had this for a while, and like I even made a side-by-side video just to analyze and see if I'm crazy, and I didn't see a difference, and it was because I didn't turn on those other settings that wobbling pixels showed off. It was like, oh, there's more stuff I have to play with. I didn't know what that stuff does. I still really don't. But the right combination of things produces an excellent image. So, big takeaway, there's a lot of options for the settings here regarding resolutions and whatnot. Now that text is on screen, I'm going to kick it up to 1080p over. It'll go to generic 4:3, so you can see that as an option. That's probably what I've used most of the time, is that. A little more screen filling, that's why a lot of people like 1080p over. It's also the more, it's like sharper, because the scaling is different. I said it before, but it's the 5X and 5X Pro, whereas 1080p fill is 4X. So this would be 1080p fill. If you like that more, then use that. If not, 1080p fill, or even 1080p under. I've used that before with the Wii. I recorded a lot of footage using 1080p under playing this Punch-Out Wii. And I like that too. It's not as screen filling, but it is pretty sharp and condensed. But I think that 1080p fill is my midpoint there. So a lot of options. Don't have like a nailed down profile for this one, but the main thing was I wanted to show off the USB loader stuff, because that's what makes such a huge difference and what's new for my setup. Alright, let's bring it all home. Okay, thanks for joining me on this one. It's definitely gonna be a long video. I've been recording for hours now, so thank you so much if you're still here. I sincerely appreciate you watching. Thanks to everyone who has subscribed and watches the content. It means a lot, truthfully. Getting beyond 800 subscribers is insane. So thank you all so much. Hope this was helpful. I know that for some of these, it wasn't like I had like a, here's what I have, try this. It was more like, here's what I've tried, here's what you can try. So I hope that in some way this is all helpful for you and kind of gets across some of the different options here, things to try, whatnot. If you're looking for more settings in action, I would say check out the 5X Pro HDR video. It shows more scanline stuff. It shows the HDR stuff in action. That's pretty cool, because I show the consoles, a selection of consoles with and without HDR alone, and then with and without scanlines, one of which example has no HDR. So if you're interested in the scanline stuff, you see more of that. Plus Retro Boost Arcade, we have a lot of episodes of that shot with the 5X Pro, variety of consoles, Super Nintendo, the RGB modded N64, a lot of GameCube stuff, using the Retrobit Prism component cables. So plenty of stuff to check out if you want to see more of this device in action. And again, tell me what you like to do profile-wise and settings-wise and whatnot. I want it to be an information exchange so I can take new ideas and apply them and see how they work and how I like them. Because you never know. Like, you come across new information by just playing around with it, like the DTV stuff. That's kind of like a new thing for me to be applying. Haven't tried that until pretty recently, just tinkering around and being like, okay, I wonder what this is for. Oh, it's for 480p sources? Okay, I'll keep that in mind. I'll use it here and there. I think I like it for the Wii, so trying new things out. So I want to learn more new things, so tell me what you use for your profiles. Thanks again so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe to help grow the channel, keep us going. You can also join the Discord server, link in the description. It's where all the channel news and updates go. We have a Super Mario Bros. Movie giveaway happening soon. The draw date for that is September 16th, I want to say. Any member of the server is applicable to win. It's like raffle style. You'll get direct messaged from the Retro Boost giveaways account with the code if you win. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day.